Chapter 1: What the Village Built. The stone came in on 3 wagons 2 days before Lian was expected. Suyin counted the blocks herself. She stood at the edge of the village square with a ledger balanced on her forearm and a brush behind her ear, marking each wagon as it rolled through. The royal convoy driver waited while she verified the count against the manifest. He looked impatient. She did not care. The capital had promised 42 pallets of cut limestone and she was not going to sign for 39. "Well, 3 short," she said. "Road was rough coming up the pass," the driver replied. "Lost a wheel, had to redistribute. Then the missing 3 should be on a 4th wagon. They'll come with the next run." Suyin wrote missing, 3 pallets, expected next convoy in the margin of the manifest and signed it. She handed the paper back to the driver and turned to the square, where half the village was already gathered around the wagons. She had been mayor of Hekou for 11 years. The village sat in a river valley between 2 mountain passes, close enough to the eastern trade road to receive news and far enough from it to be ignored by anyone with authority. The population was just over 300. They grew rice in the lowland paddies and tea on the hillside terraces, and they sent their surplus east to the market town of Changlin, which was 2 days out by foot when the weather held and closer to 4 when it rained and the path turned to mud. The stone road would cut that a half a day. Suyin had already drawn up the plans. The road came first, then an expansion to the village school so the older children could study past their 12th year instead of stopping when the local teacher ran out of material. Then a training program for the younger ones, basic magic instruction, calligraphy, mathematics, so they could register for regional exams without traveling to Changlin to prepare. The treasury allocation from the crown was modest, but it was more than Hekou had ever received, and Suyin intended to stretch every coin. She allowed herself a brief thought about why the money had come at all. Then she opened the ledger to the next page and went back to work. Heng had the road crew out before dawn. There were 9 of them, all volunteers, though calling them volunteer was generous. Heng had knocked on doors the previous evening and told people what time to show up and what to bring. He was not a man who asked twice. He was broad across the shoulders and quiet in his movements, and he had been laying stone and timber in Hekou since he was 14. The village hall, the river bridge, the retaining wall along the south terrace, Heng had built or repaired most of them. The road began at the eastern edge of the village and ran toward the Changlin Pass. The first 200 meters were already graded. Heng's crew had spent the previous week clearing brush and leveling the ground, and now with the stone finally here they could begin laying the surface. Heng worked alongside the crew without distinguishing himself from them. He lifted the blocks with the same rhythm as everyone else. He measured the gaps with a length of cord and packed gravel between the seams. When a younger man on the crew fumbled a block and cracked it along the edge, Heng picked up the 2 halves, examined them, and set them aside to fill. "We'll use those on the drainage channel," he said. The younger man started to apologize. Heng shook his head once and handed him the next block. By mid-morning, the first 30 meters of road were laid. Heng stood at the edge and looked down the line. The stone was pale gray against the dark valley soil, and in the morning light it looked clean and solid and like it would hold for a long time. Old Zhao from the next farmstead walked over and leaned on the fence. "Your boy did all this," Zhao said. "The crown sent the stone," Heng replied. "We're laying it." "You know what I means." Heng picked up another block. The road needed doing either way. Zhao laughed and walked off. Heng set the block down carefully and measured the gap. His hands were steady. His face gave away nothing, but he worked faster after that. Jingyi had repainted the banner 4 times. The first version had been red characters on white cloth, which was traditional. The second had been gold on blue, which he decided was too imperial for a village celebration. The third had been black on persimmon, which Lan told him looked like a funeral notice. The fourth was deep green characters on cream cloth with a painted border of tea leaves and river reeds, and Jingyi was almost satisfied with it. "It's fine," Lan said from the ladder where she was stringing lanterns across the square. "Fine is not what I want," Jingyi said. "It's good, it's really good. Can you hand me the next lantern?" Jingyi passed a paper lantern up to his daughter without looking away from the banner. He held the brush between his fingers and considered whether the final character needed a heavier stroke. Jingyi was a calligrapher by trade and a painter by compulsion. He had never been to the capital, but he had studied under a master in Changlin for 2 years when he was young, and he still mixed his own ink from pine soot and hide glue and kept his brushes in a rack he had built himself. Wei came around the corner carrying a crate of candles and nearly walked into the ladder. Lan grabbed the top rung with both hands and swore at him. "Watch it," she said. "Didn't see you," Wei said. He set the crate down and looked up at the lanterns. "How many more?" 12, Lan said, "and the garlands for the front gate." "Where's An?" "Helping mother count something, I don't know, go ask her." Wei picked up the crate again and carried it toward the village hall. He was 15 and already built like Heng, though he was Jingyi's son by blood. He had started working with the construction crew at 13 because he wanted to, and Jingyi had let him go without complaint. Mei appeared from the direction of the village hall with a list in her hand. She was the oldest of the four, 20 years old, and she had her mother's directness and her mother's habit of writing everything down. The convoy left 2 barrels of lamp oil, Mei said, reading from the list. Mother wants to know if you need any for the lanterns or if she should put it all in storage. I need 4 liters, Jingyi said. She said you'd say that, she already set it aside. Mei folded the list and put it in her sleeve. She looked at the banner. It's good. Thank you. Lian's going to cry when he sees it. Jingyi did not respond to that. He set the brush down carefully and stepped back to look at the banner from a distance. It was good. He had written their son's name in the careful, formal hand he reserved for important events, and the green ink caught the light in a way that made the characters look alive. He gets here tomorrow, Mei said. I know when he gets here. I'm just saying. I know. Mei left. Jingyi stood in the square alone for a moment. The lanterns swung gently overhead. The banner hung straight and clean across the front of the village hall. He picked up the brush and added one more stroke to the border. Then he cleaned the brush and put it away. And found Suyin in the village hall that evening. The youngest of the Li children was 8. He had been adopted into the family when he was 3, brought to Hekou by a trader who had found him in a border village that had been abandoned after a flood. He did not remember the village or the flood. He remembered Suyin's hands lifting him off the back of the cart, and he remembered Heng carving him a small wooden horse that first night, and after that the memories were all of Hekou. He climbed onto the bench across from Suyin's desk and sat there without speaking. She was reviewing a supply list and did not look up immediately. And she said after a moment, still writing. Mei said Lian is coming home tomorrow. He is. Is he going to stay? Suyin set the brush down. She looked at her youngest. He's going to visit, she said. He has to go back to the capital after. How long will he visit? A few days, maybe a week. And considered this, I don't remember him very much. You were 5 when he left, you were small. Wei says he's tall. Taller than Wei, last I heard. And seemed to consider this information. Is he nice? Suyin reached across the desk and put her hand on the boy's head briefly. He's going to love you. How do you know? Because we raised him, Suyin said. Now go help Jingyi with the lanterns before he repaints something. And slid off the bench and went out. Suyin watched him cross the square in the last of the evening light, dodging Lan on the ladder and nearly colliding with a stack of garlands. She picked up the brush and went back to her list, laughing. The last item on the page read, clear the front room, make up the bed. He'll want his own space. She underlined it once and closed the ledger. The escort arrived at midday. Heng heard it first. He was on the road, laying the final row of stone before the village gate, and he straightened up when the sound carried over the ridge. Hooves on packed earth, then on stone, a cleaner sound and the low creak of a carriage. The crew stopped working. People came out of houses and shops. Lan climbed down from the ladder. Wei set down his hammer. Mei came out of the village hall with Suyin half a step behind her. Jingyi was still in the square adjusting a lantern when he heard the noise and went still. And stood in the middle of the road with his arms at his sides, watching the ridge. 2 royal guards on horseback came first. Behind them a small carriage with the imperial crest on the door, lacquered black and gold. The carriage rolled through the gate and onto the new stone road, and the wheels sounded different on it, steady and firm. The carriage door was open, no one was inside. Walking beside it, one hand resting on the frame, was a young man in a dark blue travel coat. He had taken his shoes off at some point and was walking barefoot on the new stone. He was looking at the road under his feet with an expression that made Heng's chest tighten. Then Lian looked up and saw the banners. He saw the lanterns. He saw the painted characters on the cream cloth, his own name in Jingyi's careful handwriting. He saw the square, scrubbed clean, lined with tables that were already being set for the feast. He saw the village, his village, dressed up and waiting. He saw his family at the end of the road. Jingyi reached him first. He crossed the square at a pace that was almost running, and he pulled his son into his arms and held him off the ground for a moment. Lian grabbed the back of his father's coat with both fists and pressed his face into his shoulder. Heng came next. He put one hand on the back of Lian's head and the other on Jingyi's shoulder and stood there with them, solid and quiet. Suyin walked to them. She took Lian's face in both hands when Jingyi let him go. She looked at him for a long time. She did not say anything except his name, and her voice cracked on it, and that was enough. Mei, Wei, and Lan crowded in behind. and stood a few feet back, watching, his arms still at his sides. Lian knelt down on the stone road. He was eye level with the boy. "You must be in," Lian said. "I've heard about you in every letter." And looked at him. "Why are you barefoot?" "I wanted to feel the road." And looked down at Lian's feet on the stone. He looked back up. "It's a good road," and said, "Heng built it." "I know he did," Lian said. The village pressed in around them. Someone started clapping. Someone else lit the first lantern, though it was still daylight and there was no need for it, and reached out and took Lian's hand, and Lian stood up, and the two of them walked together into the square. "Welcome to the Portal Library. Step through and let the magic begin." Make sure to like, subscribe, and comment if you'd love more stories or have a request. New videos uploaded every Friday. The Road Home, a short story. Chapter 2, What the Night Gave Back. Lian had not expected the fully built road. He had read his mother's letters. He knew about the stone, the convoy, the plans she had drawn up for the school expansion. But reading about a road and standing on one were different things, and when his bare feet touched the limestone surface at the village gate, something shifted in his chest that he could not put back. The feast filled the square by late afternoon. Every family in Hekou had brought something. There were dumplings folded into shapes Lian recognized from childhood. One Mrs. Zhao still crimped hers with the double twist that no one else in the village could replicate. There were whole river fish steamed in banana leaves, bowls of pickled radish, pork ribs braised in dark soy and star anise, rice wine in clay jars with cloth stoppers, and a tower of red bean cakes that it had apparently been guarding since morning. Lian sat at the center table with his family. Jingyi kept his hand on Lian's shoulder as if to confirm he was still there. Heng sat across from him and ate steadily, glancing up every few minutes. Suyin was at the end of the table reviewing something with Mei, but her foot was pressed against Lian's under the bench, and she left it there for the duration of the meal. Wei asked about the capital. Lian told him about the examination hall, a building so large that 2,000 candidates sat in individual cells for 3 days without speaking to anyone. Wei wanted to know if the cells had windows. They did not. "I'd lose my mind," Wei said. "You nearly did on a rainy afternoon last spring," Lan said. "Remember when you tried to reorganize the tool shed and gave up after an hour?" "That's different. It really isn't." And sat next to Lian and did not say much. He ate his portion carefully and watched Lian with a steady, evaluating look that reminded Lian of Suyin. Halfway through the meal and moved his bench closer so their arms were touching. Lian did not comment on it. He shifted his elbow to make room. The music started after the main dishes were cleared. Old Chen brought out his erhu and played while his granddaughter accompanied on a bamboo flute. The square filled with movement, people standing, talking in clusters, children chasing each other between the tables. Lanterns swung overhead in the evening wind. Someone set off a string of small firecrackers near the gate and then flinched and then laughed. Lian moved through the crowd slowly. He was stopped every few steps by someone who wanted to clasp his hand or touch his shoulder or tell him they had known he was special since he was small. He smiled at all of them. He meant it. These people had fed him, taught him, and watched him grow up on these streets. He carried their village to the capital and scored higher than anyone from a city 10 times its size, and now they were feeding him again. He was standing near the wine table, refilling his cup, when he heard a voice behind him. "You're holding that cup wrong." Lian turned around. Shen was leaning against the corner post of the nearest stall with his arms crossed and a look on his face that Lian had not forgotten. Shen was 23, a year older than Lian. He worked the tea terraces on the east slope with his family and had done so since he was old enough to carry a basket. He was taller than Lian remembered, broader through the arms, and his hair was tied back loosely with a cord that was coming undone. He had a scar on his jaw that was new. "I'm holding it fine," Lian said. "You're holding it like someone from the capital, 2 fingers on the rim, very refined." "I've been in the capital for 8 months. And you forgot how to drink like a normal person." Lian laughed. He switched his grip to a full palm around the cup the way everyone in Hekou drank. Shen watched him do it and his mouth curved. "Better," Shen said. They stood together at the edge of the feast and talked. Shen told him about the harvest, a good season. The east slope had produced more than expected. His mother's back was improving. Lian told him about the palace, about the examination results, about the crown prince's study hall where the shelves were 3 stories tall and the books were bound in silk. "Silk," Shen repeated, "for books. Some of them are 500 years old." "The silk or the books?" "Both." Shen shook his head. He refilled both their cups from the jar on the table. Their fingers touched on the handle and neither of them moved away. The conversation slowed as the wine settled in. Shen asked about the palace quarters, about the food, about whether Lian had made friends. Lian answered honestly. He had made acquaintances. He had not made friends. The other scholars kept a careful distance from the village boy who had outscored them all. Their loss, Shen said. I didn't say it bothered me. You didn't have to. Lian looked at him. The lantern light caught the new scar on Shen's jaw and the loose cord in his hair and the slope of his collarbone where his tunic had shifted open. 8 months was a long time. Lian had spent most of it in study halls and examination rooms, surrounded by silk-bound books and scholars who touched nothing and no one. He put his hand on Shen's knee under the table. Shen did not flinch. He set his cup down and turned his body toward Lian, his leg pressing into Lian's palm. I missed you, Lian said. I know you did. You could at least pretend to be surprised. I could, Shen said, but you're still holding my knee, so I think we're past that. Lian moved his hand up Shen's thigh. Shen's breath caught a small sound that the music almost covered. He leaned closer and his mouth was near Lian's ear. Your fathers are watching, Shen said. Lian glanced across the square. Jingyi was pretending to adjust a lantern that did not need adjusting. Heng was looking directly at them with an expression that could have been stern if not for the faint tilt at the corner of his mouth. They know about us, Lian said. They've known since we were 17. Knowing and watching are two different things. Lian stood and pulled Shen up by the wrist. They walked through the square together, past the tables, past the music, past Mei, who glanced at them once and went back to her conversation. Lan whistled from somewhere behind them. Wei told her to shut up. They walked down the main street toward the Li house. The lanterns were still lit overhead, painting the stone path in warm orange light. Shen's hand found Lian's between them, fingers threading together. At the house, Lian pushed the front door open. The family was still at the feast. The front room was dark and cool and smelled like pine oil and the jasmine that Jingyi grew in pots by the window. Shen closed the door behind them and Lian pressed him against it. He kissed him and Shen kissed back immediately, one hand in Lian's hair and the other gripping the front of his coat. Lian pulled the cord from Shen's hair and it fell loose against his jaw. He put his mouth on Shen's neck and felt the pulse there, fast and hard under the skin. 8 months, Shen said against Lian's temple. I know. Don't make me wait any longer. Lian pulled him toward the room Suyin had prepared. The bed was freshly made, the blankets folded at the foot, and a small oil lamp burned on the table beside it. Lian did not remember his mother being sentimental, but the lamp was there, and the room was clean, and the window was cracked open to let in the night air from the valley. They undressed each other slowly. Lian traced the scar on Shen's jaw with his thumb, and Shen told him it was from a branch that snapped during the autumn pruning. Lian kissed it. He kissed the hollow of Shen's throat, the ridge of his shoulder, the flat plane of his stomach where the skin was warm and taut from years of carrying baskets up the hillside. Shen pulled him down onto the bed and they were skin against skin, mouths finding each other in the low light. The lamp flickered when the breeze came through the window. Lian held Shen's face in both hands and looked at him, and Shen looked back without any of the careful distance that Lian had grown used to in the capital. They moved together. It was unhurried and deliberate and familiar in a way that made Lian's chest ache. Shen knew his body. Shen knew what made him close his eyes, what made him grip the sheets, what made him say Shen's name in the dark. And Lian knew Shen the same way, the sounds he made, the places where his breathing changed, the way his back arched when Lian found the right rhythm. Afterward they lay in the dark with the window open and the distant sound of the feast carrying up the street. Shen was on his side with his head on Lian's shoulder and one leg thrown over his. Lian's hand moved slowly up and down Shen's back. When do you leave? Shen asked. A few days, maybe a week. That's what your mother said when I asked. Lian smiled. You asked my mother. She's the mayor. I figured she'd know the schedule. She does. She always does. They were quiet for a while. The lamp burned low and the shadows on the ceiling shifted. The crown prince, Shen said. What's he like? Formal, smart, lonelier than he lets on. Do you like him? Lian considered the question. I think I will. I don't know him well enough yet. Shen nodded against his shoulder. He did not ask further and Lian appreciated that. They had never been exclusive. No one in Hekou was, and Shen understood that what they had was real without needing it to be the only thing. Come back, Shen said. I will. I mean it, don't become someone who doesn't come back. Lian tightened his arm around Shen's shoulders. I walked the road barefoot. You think I'm going to forget where I'm from? Shen laughed quietly against his skin. Fair enough. They fell asleep like that, tangled together, with the lanterns still burning outside and the village settling into quiet around them. I hope you are enjoying this story so far. What do you think of Lian and Shen future together? Don't forget to like and subscribe. Chapter 3 from now onwards. Lian woke to an empty bed and the smell of congee from the kitchen. Shen was gone. The blankets on his side were pulled up and folded, which was such a deliberate gesture that Lian smiled at the ceiling. Shen had never folded anything in his life. He must have stood there and thought about it before leaving. Lian dressed and went into the front room, and was sitting at the table eating a bowl of congee with pickled mustard greens, his legs swinging beneath the bench because they did not reach the floor. He looked up when Lian came in. Shen left early and he said he had to get to the terraces. He did. He was quiet about it. He stepped over the creaky board by the door. He knows where it is. And gave him a look and went back to his congee. Lian sat across from him and served himself from the pot on the table. The rice had been cooked with ginger and dried shrimp, which meant Heng had made it. Jingyi's congee was always plain. Suyin did not cook. The morning was gray and cool. Rain had come through overnight and the air smelled like wet stone and earth. Through the window, Lian could see the square being swept by two of the neighbors' children, clearing away the remnants of last night's feast. Paper scraps from the firecrackers, a garland that had come loose from the gate. "What are you doing today?" Lian asked. "I thought I'd help at the tea house for a while." "Can I come?" "Don't you have lessons?" "Not until afternoons." Lian looked at him. The boy was watching him with that same direct, evaluating gaze. "Wipe your face," Lian said, "and yes, of course you can come with." The tea house was called the Three Lanterns, though it only had 2 lanterns hanging outside and no one could remember if there had ever been a third. It sat on the corner where the main street met the river path, a low building with a tile roof and an open front counter where people ordered tea and small dishes throughout the day. It was the closest thing Hekou had to a public gathering place outside the village hall. Lian had worked there every summer between the ages of 13 and 19. The owner, Mrs. Fang, was 72 and had run the place since before Lian was born. She had a bad hip and a sharp tongue, and she made the best sesame noodles in the valley. When Lian walked in with and beside him, Mrs. Fang looked him up and down from behind the counter. "You're late," she said. "I haven't worked here in 3 years." "And now you're 3 years late. Put on an apron." Lian put on an apron and sat on a stool near the counter, and Mrs. Fang gave him a plate of steamed pork buns without being asked. The morning moved at the tea house's pace, which was unhurried. Lian cleaned the tables, restocked the tea canisters, and swept the front step. His hands remembered the work. The counter was the same height, the broom hung on the same hook. Mrs. Fang still kept the good tea leaves in the blue jar on the top shelf and the everyday leaves in the basket under the counter. People came in steadily. Some wanted tea. Most wanted to see Lian. He poured for them and answered their questions and accepted their congratulations, and in between customers he wiped down the counter and refilled the hot water. Yunara came in around mid-morning. She was 38 years older than Lian, and she managed the village granary. She had held the position since she was 25, appointed by Suyin after the previous manager retired. She was tall, with wide-set eyes and calloused hands, and she wore her hair in a single braid that hung over one shoulder. She had a reputation for being precise with numbers and blunt with people. Lian had admired her since he was a teenager. She had been the first adult outside his family to take his studies seriously, lending him books from her own collection and quizzing him on them when he returned them. She had never treated him like a child, which at 15 had made him feel visible in a way that stayed with him. "Lian Li," she said, settling onto a stool at the counter. "Pouring tea again, are we?" "You know what they say, old habits die hard." "Mrs. Fang must be thrilled. She told me I was late." "You are 3 years late by my count." Lian poured her tea. She wrapped both hands around the cup and studied him while she drank. He held still under her gaze. "You look older," she said. "I am older." "That's not what I mean. You carry yourself differently. The capital changed you somehow." "Maybe." "It's in your shoulders. You used to hunch when you were unsure of something. You've stopped doing that." Lian had not noticed. He poured himself a cup and leaned against the counter across from her. The tea house was quiet. Mrs. Fang had taken into the back to help sort dried herbs, which Lian suspected was deliberate. "How's the granary?" he asked. "Full. We had a strong harvest, and the Crown supplement doubled our reserves. Your mother is already planning a second storehouse." "Of course she is." Yunara smiled. Her smile changed her face. The precision dropped away and something warmer came through. "I read your examination essay," she said, "the one they published in the regional gazette." Lian blinked. "They published it." "Top score in the realm. Of course they published it. Your argument on agricultural magic subsidies was sharper than anything the ministry scholars have put out in a decade." "You read ministry publications." "I manage a granary. I read everything." Lian laughed. She laughed too, and the sound was lower than he expected, and he realized he had never heard her laugh like that before, or maybe he had and he had been too young to hear her tune. He reached across the counter and touched the end of her braid where it rested on her collarbone. She did not pull away. Her eyes stayed on his. "You're bold now," she said. "I was always bold, you just thought I was too young." "You were too young. And now—" Yunara set her cup down. She put her hand over his where it rested near her shoulder. Her fingers were rough from grain sacks and ledger work, and they were warm. "Now you're not," she said. Lian leaned across the counter and kissed her. She kissed him back with one hand on the side of his jaw, holding him there. It was a different thing than last night with Shen. This was new territory for both of them. Her mouth was unfamiliar and certain at the same time, and when they pulled apart, she was looking at him with an expression he had not seen on her before. "Your mother will have opinions about this," Yunara said. "My mother has opinions about everything. She's also my boss." "Then I suppose you'd better tell her before someone else does." Yunara laughed again, that same seductive low sound, and picked up her tea. Lian stayed leaning against the counter with his heart hammering and his face warm. Through the doorway to the back room, he could hear Mrs. Fang talking to him about the difference between wild ginger and cultivated ginger, and he was fairly certain the old woman was talking louder than necessary so they would know she was staying where she was. The afternoon was for the family. Lian found them in the courtyard. Suyin was at the table with her ledger as always. Heng was mending a chair leg with a hand drill and a wooden dowel. Jingyi was painting at the small table near the plum tree, working on something he covered with a cloth when Lian came out. "I saw that," Lian said. "You saw nothing," Jingyi said. Mei was reading on the bench by the wall. Wei was sharpening a chisel on a whetstone, the sound steady and rhythmic. Lan was braiding garland flowers into Anne's hair while Anne sat cross-legged on the ground and tolerated it. Lian sat down at the table with Suyin. She did not look up from the ledger. "Yunara came by the tea house," Lian said. "I heard." "From whom?" "Mrs. Fang sent Wei." Lian looked at Wei, who did not look up from the chisel. The corner of his mouth twitched. Suyin closed the ledger and folded her hands over it. She looked at her son. "Yunara is a good woman," Suyin said. "She runs the granary well and she has a practical mind. She is also 8 years older than you and she reports to me." "I'm aware." "Good, then I don't need to say more." She opened the ledger again, then she closed it. "She lent you books when you were young. I always appreciated that." That was as close to approval as Suyin came. Lian accepted it. Heng finished the chair leg and tested it on the flagstone. It held. He reached under the workbench and pulled out a small cloth bundle which he set on the table in front of Lian. "For the palace," Heng said. Lian unwrapped it. Inside was a folding knife with a wooden handle, hand-carved with a pattern of river reeds. The blade was short and practical. The handle fit his palm exactly. "You'll need something they didn't give you," Heng said. "The palace will give you silk and lacquer. This is ash, wood, and steel." Lian closed his hand around the handle. "Thank you, Ba." Heng nodded once and went back to the workbench. Jingyi removed the cloth from his painting. It was a small scroll, no longer than Lian's forearm, painted on silk paper. The image was the view from the Li courtyard, the plum tree, the flagstone, the edge of the roof with the mountains beyond it. The colors were soft and precise, and in the lower corner Jingyi had written the Li family name in his formal handwriting. "So you remember what it looks like," Jingyi said. His voice was steady, but his hands were not. Lian took the scroll carefully. He wanted to say something sweet and impactful enough for the moment, but there was nothing that fit, so he said die and put his hand on Jingyi's arm, and Jingyi covered it with his own and squeezed. Suyin reached into her sleeve and produced a folded piece of paper. She handed it to Lian. He opened it. It was a list, written in her clean administrative script. 4 additional limestone pallets for road extension east. Cedar planking for school expansion, 200 board lengths. 1 qualified teacher for advanced mathematics and natural philosophy. Ink supply allocation for village school annual. Request for regional postal route extension to include Hekou. Lian read it twice and started laughing. "This is a requisition list," he said. "You'll have the crown prince's ear, use it. I'm his study companion, not his advisor." "Not yet," Suyin said. Mei looked up from her book and smiled. Wei laughed. Lan stopped braiding flowers and grinned. Even Heng made a sound that could have been a laugh if you were generous with the interpretation. And pulled a flower from his hair and held it out to Lian. It was a small white plum blossom, crushed slightly from Lan's braiding. "You can take this too," and said. Lian took the flower. He put it inside the folded list and closed the paper around it. "I'll keep it safe," Lian said. "Promise. Promise." Lian walked the village at dusk. The lanterns were still strung across the square from the feast. No one had taken them down yet, and the evening wind moved through them, making them sway and flicker. The tables had been cleared and stacked against the wall of the village hall. The banner Jingyi had painted still hung across the front, green characters on cream cloth, Lian's name catching the last of the light. He walked the new stone road from the square to the eastern gate, the full length of what Heng and the crew had laid. The stone was cool under his feet. The mortar between the blocks was still curring, and the surface had a faint roughness that would smooth with use and weather and the passage of people walking to Changlin and back. The road ended at the gate, where the stone met the packed dirt path that led down toward the pass. Somewhere beyond the pass was Changlin, and beyond Changlin was the regional capital, and beyond that was the imperial city where a study hall waited for him with 3 stories of silk-bound books and a crown prince who did not yet know what to make of the village boy who had beaten every scholar in the realm. Lian stood at the boundary where stone met earth. He had the knife in his belt, the scroll tucked inside his coat, the list in his pocket with Anne's flower pressed inside it. He had the taste of Shen's mouth from last night and Yunara's from this morning. He had the sound of Heng's hands on stone and Jingyi's brush on silk and Suyen's pen on paper. He had 300 people behind him who had decorated a road and lit lanterns in the daylight because he was theirs and they wanted him to know it. The escort would come in the morning. He would put on his shoes and walk the road properly and climb into the carriage and ride east through the pass toward whatever came next. He turned around and walked back into the village. The lanterns were lit above him. The courtyard was waiting. He was not ready to leave. He went home anyway because the people he loved were there and he had one more night. The end. The crown prince's ink was dying. Not drying, dying. The characters on the page were fading even as the prince wrote them, the black bleeding into gray and then into nothing, as if the paper were swallowing the words whole. 3 palace calligraphers had already examined the ink stone. 2 had declared it cursed. 1 had suggested replacing it with an ink stone from the imperial vault, which cost more than most families earned in a year. Lian was sitting in the corner of the study hall reading when the prince looked at him. "You haven't offered an opinion," the prince said. "You didn't ask for one. I'm asking now." Lian set his book down. He walked to the prince's desk and picked up the ink stone. He turned it over. He smelled it. He touched the surface with his thumb and rubbed the residue between his fingers. "It's not cursed," Lian said. "The calligraphers seem to disagree. The calligraphers have never made their own ink." Lian set the stone down. He looked at the ink stick sitting in its tray, a fine stick, lacquered and stamped with the imperial seal. "Whoever made this batch used pine soot from green wood," he said. "The resin didn't burn off completely. It binds fine when you first grind it, but the moisture in the paper reactivates the resin and breaks the pigment down. My father is a calligrapher. He made this mistake once when I was 12. He threw the whole batch out and started over." The study hall was quiet. The 3 calligraphers stared at him. The prince picked up the ink stick and turned it over in his fingers. This was a gift from the Minister of Rights. Then the Minister of Rights should find a better ink maker. Someone behind Lian inhaled sharply. You did not criticize a minister's gifts in the imperial study hall. You did not do it casually, and you certainly did not do it in front of the crown prince while wearing a coat that still smelled like valley rain. The prince looked at Lian for a long time. Then he laughed. It was a short, surprised sound, and it changed his entire face, and for a moment he looked like someone who had not laughed in a very long time. "Get me a new ink stick," the prince said to the nearest calligrapher, "and find out who supplied the minister's batch. I want to know if the rest of the palace inventory has the same problem." He looked back at Lian. "Sit closer tomorrow, I'm tired of shouting across the room." Lian picked up his book and moved 1 table closer. It was, he decided, a reasonable start. Quote of the week: "Wherever is your home, that is where your heart must be." Voltaire. Thank you for listening to The Road Home. Hope you enjoyed this story. If you want to hear more, please like, subscribe, and leave a comment. New stories are uploaded every Friday.